Two starving twins carry bricks just to survive. But when a young billionaire stops his car and sees them, what he does next leaves the entire city speechless. The sun over the New Mexico desert was merciless, an unforgiving blaze that made the sand shimmer and the air ripple. Alongside the cracked highway, two small figures trudged slowly, weighed down not just by the scorching heat, but by the burdens in their hands. JC and Casson were 10 years old, but their eyes carried the weight of someone far older. They were twins with tangled light brown hair streaked with dust and matching freckles speckled across their sunburned faces. JC was the older one by 7 minutes, and she had decided early in their short, hard life that she was responsible for her brother's survival. Her shoulders, thin and bruised, carried the load of a sister, a mother, and a guardian all in one. In their arms, they carried old red bricks, chipped, dusty, scavenged from a demolition site on the edge of town. Each brick earned them 10 cents from a construction foreman who didn't ask questions. He didn't care if they were children or where they slept at night. He just knew they were fast, quiet, and desperate. And desperate kids don't complain. JC's arms trembled, but she kept walking. Her lips were dry and cracked, and every few seconds she had to blink the sweat out of her stinging eyes. Next to her, Kassan was slower, wheezing softly, his breath shallow, but he refused to complain. "If we get 12 more today," JC murmured hoarsely, "we'll have enough for a loaf of bread. Maybe a can of beans, too." Casson didn't reply. His fingers clenched tighter around the bricks. He had fainted once last week, and JC hadn't let him carry the full load since. But today, she didn't have a choice. The world moved past them without pause. Cars zoomed by on the highway, air-conditioned and tinted, windows up, music playing. No one saw them. No one wanted to see them, until the black Range Rover pulled up and stopped. At first, JC thought it was a cop, and her entire body went rigid. She dropped one brick and instantly stepped in front of Casson, her eyes scanning for an escape route. But the vehicle was too clean, too expensive. She stared at the chrome wheels, the reflective glass, the ghost-like shimmer of luxury. The rear door opened and a man stepped out. He wasn't old, late 20s, maybe 30. His navy blue suit didn't have a speck of dust on it. His white shirt practically glowed, and his shoes. She had never seen shoes that clean. His face was chiseled, smooth-shaven, with sharp eyes that narrowed when he saw them. This was Asher Lowell, a billionaire before he turned 30, a man whose real estate empire had reshaped skylines, the founder of Solara Living, a company that built luxury eco-residences for the wealthy elite. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in this dusty town, not on this broken road. But fate, as it often does, doesn't check the schedule. Asher's eyes locked on the children, on their arms, the bricks. He didn't move for a moment. He just stood there, speechless, as the hot wind whipped against his suit and the dust swirled around his polished shoes. "What are you doing?" he asked finally, his voice calm but heavy with something JC didn't trust, concern. She squared her shoulders. "Working." "You're carrying bricks?" "For money." "Where are your parents?" JC's face hardened, her lips pressed into a line. Casson coughed. "They're gone," she said coldly. "We're not looking for charity. We just need to work." Asher took a small step closer, and JC instinctively moved in front of her brother again, like a wall. "I'm not trying to scare you," he said gently, "but this isn't safe. You shouldn't be—" "We've been through worse," JC interrupted, her voice steady. "You gonna buy some bricks or not?" The absurdity of the question made Asher exhale. Was it a laugh? A sigh? Even he wasn't sure. He looked down at the pile near their feet. Dusty, cracked bricks, no more than 15. JC's hands were trembling now. He could see the rawness in her palms, the red lines where the bricks had bitten into her skin. Casson had a small cut above his eye, likely from falling. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't felt this kind of silence in years, so he did the only thing that came to mind. He shrugged off his jacket, dropped it carefully into the back seat of his car, and walked forward until he was standing next to the boy. Then, without a word, he bent down, picked up a brick, and held it in both hands. Casson blinked, confused. JC's jaw tensed. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," Asher replied softly. "But no kid should carry this kind of weight alone." And in that moment, without knowing why, JC's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't cried in months, not when they were kicked out of the shelter, not when Casson coughed blood, not when she had to steal toothpaste. But now, a stranger had picked up a brick, and it cracked something deep inside her. Asher didn't ask more questions. He simply stood beside them in his spotless dress shirt and $1,000 shoes under the desert sun, holding a chipped brick as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time in a very long time, the twins weren't invisible. They were seen. JC didn't sleep that night. Even after the sun had vanished and the desert chilled to bone-cutting cold, she sat upright beside the dumpster they'd chosen as shelter, her eyes darting to every sound. Casson lay curled beside her, wrapped in the oversized flannel shirt Asher had given them before he left. It still smelled faintly of his cologne, clean, citrusy, and warm. Something about it made her uneasy. Too many times, kindness had come with a price. Asher had promised to return the next morning. People never returned. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. At dawn, the sky turned a pale lavender. JC stood, stretched her sore limbs, and shook her brother gently. "Come on," she whispered. "We got to get more bricks before he comes, if he comes." Casson stirred, eyes fluttering open. "I dreamed about pancakes," he murmured, voice croaky, "with butter and syrup." JC managed a tight smile. "Then we better get moving, huh? Pancakes don't buy themselves." They scavenged from the ruins of the collapsed motel again, carefully picking through shards of drywall and scorched wood. JC scraped her arm on a metal pipe and winced, but didn't stop. Casson wheezed, his pace slower, but he followed her lead. By the time the sun rose fully, they'd stacked nearly 24 bricks on an old dolly they'd found in a trash heap. The wheels creaked horribly, but it worked, just barely. JC wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of grime. That's when she heard it, the low purr of an engine, different from the growling trucks or rusty sedans that normally passed them by. This was smooth, expensive. She turned her head, and there it was, again. The black Range Rover. He had come back. Asher stepped out of the vehicle, no suit today. Just a dark green Henley, jeans and boots that somehow still looked like they cost more than everything JC and Casson had ever owned combined. His hair was tousled like he'd run his hand through it a dozen times since sunrise. But his eyes were the same, steady, alert, and watching them with intent. "You said you'd be at the construction site," he said, stopping in front of them. JC narrowed her eyes. "Didn't think you'd actually come?" "I said I would. People say lots of things." Asher didn't argue. He nodded slowly, then turned to look at their pile. "Did you build a whole house since yesterday?" he asked, tilting his head at the mound. JC snorted. "No, just breakfast." Kassan, exhausted, leaned against the wall behind them. His face was pale. Asher noticed immediately. "How long has he been like that?" he asked quietly. JC stiffened. "He's fine." "He's not fine," Asher said. "He's pale. His breathing's shallow. Has he eaten today?" "We had half a granola bar," Casson mumbled. Asher exhaled through his nose. "Get in the car." JC bristled instantly. "No. I'm not taking you anywhere shady, JC." "How do you know my name?" she shot back. He hesitated, then pulled a folded scrap of paper from his pocket. It was the receipt from a sandwich shop, the one he had scribbled on before leaving yesterday. "You told me. I wrote it down, so I wouldn't forget." That silenced her. "I'm not here to take anything from you," Asher added, voice calm. "I'm trying to help. Just a meal, a real one. You can sit in the car the whole time and watch. I'll buy food, give it to you, and leave if you want." JC looked at Casson, then at the bricks. Her stomach twisted. This could be a trap. But her brother, he was swaying. She didn't speak. She just took his hand and led him to the car. Inside, the air conditioning was cold enough to make her teeth chatter. The seats were soft, too soft. Her fingers gripped the edge like it might vanish at any moment. True to his word, Asher didn't drive off. Instead, he ordered food from a nearby diner on his phone. JC watched every movement. When the food arrived, piping hot pancakes, eggs, sausage, toast, orange juice, Asher handed it all to them without touching a bite himself. Kassan dug in like a wild animal. JC hesitated. She studied the utensils, the weight of the fork, the condensation on the glass of juice. Then, she took a bite. She hadn't tasted anything that rich in her entire life. It hurt her throat going down, as if her body wasn't ready for real food. Asher leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "What happened to your parents?" JC didn't answer at first. Then, voice low, Mom died, stroke, working night shifts at Shell. Dad? Don't know. He was gone before we could talk. Asher nodded. You've been alone ever since? JC met his gaze, defiant. We do fine. He said nothing for a moment. Then he reached for the glove box and pulled out a file. Thin, manila, freshly printed. Now, I had someone look into the shelter records, he said, just to understand what happened. You two were registered, then disappeared. We had to leave, she snapped. I know. I'm not here to bring you back there. Then why all this? What do you want from us? Asher looked at her with something strange in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was familiarity. When I was your age, he said slowly, my mom overdosed on heroin in a motel bathroom. I sat outside for 2 days before someone found me. JC blinked. No one came for me either, he added. But someone helped me anyway. He looked out the window. Now it's my turn. JC didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to fight. Not yet. Casson hiccuped through his last bite of syrup-drenched pancake. And JC, for the first time in what felt like years, leaned back in the seat and exhaled. The next morning, JC woke up in a room that didn't smell like garbage or mold. For a few seconds, her mind panicked. Where was the alley, the dumpster, the bricks, the sun-scorched pavement beneath her back? But as her eyes adjusted, she realized she was in a clean bed, with white cotton sheets and a soft blanket. A small ceiling fan hummed gently above her. There was a dresser across the room, a folded towel on the chair, and on the windowsill, 2 peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Her stomach growled before she could stop it. Casson was curled beside her on a second bed, breathing quietly, his face no longer gray. The dark circles under his eyes had faded slightly overnight. He looked younger somehow, softer, like a child again instead of a soldier in a war he never asked to fight. JC sat up slowly, disoriented. The room was plain but clean, part of a small guest wing in one of Asher's development properties. Not a hotel, more like a temporary model home with finished rooms, not yet sold. It didn't have luxury furniture or designer touches, but to JC it felt like a palace. She heard footsteps and immediately tensed. The door opened slightly. Asher stood there holding 2 bottles of water and a paper bag. Good morning, he said, voice low so as not to wake Casson. I brought breakfast. JC narrowed her eyes. You said we'd be here just for the night. You are, he said. But that doesn't mean I'm letting you skip breakfast. He placed the bag on the dresser and set the waters down carefully. You slept 13 hours, Casson even longer. You needed it. JC got up, still cautious, and grabbed the bag. Inside were warm biscuits, scrambled eggs, and little tubs of strawberry jam. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched one of the biscuits. You're not like other rich people, she muttered. Asher leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I'll take that as a compliment. JC gave him a suspicious look. Why are you really doing this? You don't even know us. I don't need to know you, he replied. I just needed to see you. He paused, then added, I see a lot of things now I didn't notice before. My whole life I was so focused on building skyscrapers, buying land, pushing up the stock value. But I didn't look down. I didn't see the kids walking through construction zones with bricks in their arms. His voice grew quieter. Until you... JC didn't say anything. She didn't trust it. Not yet, but her fingers clutched the biscuit tighter. Casson stirred and sat up, rubbing his eyes. Is this still real? Asher smiled softly. Very real. Hungry? The boy nodded instantly. JC handed him the second biscuit. I can't keep you here forever, Asher said, but I can help you figure out something better than that alley. JC's eyes hardened again. Like what? A foster system? Back to the shelter where Casson got punched in the mouth for having asthma? Asher's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. I don't believe in forcing people into boxes they already tried to escape from, he said. But there's something else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded brochure. It was slightly crumpled at the edges. This place is called Everstead. It's a private program, not government-run. It's designed for kids like you. Abandoned, overlooked, traumatized. But it's run by people who actually care. Teachers, doctors, counselors. It's funded anonymously, but, well, let's just say I know the guy who writes the checks. JC raised an eyebrow. You? He shrugged. I set it up 5 years ago, but I've never placed anyone in it myself, until now. Casson looked up from his biscuit, his mouth full. Do they have pancakes there? Asher laughed. Better. Real maple syrup. JC stayed silent. Her eyes scanned the brochure. Pictures of smiling kids, classrooms, trees, music rooms, even horses. It's not a trap, he added. I'll take you there myself. You can meet the staff, walk around. If you hate it, I'll drive you back here. And then what? She asked. Just back to the bricks? No, Asher said. Then I help you find a better option. But you won't be alone. Not anymore. The words stirred something deep in her, an ache she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Being alone had become part of her identity. She wore it like armor, like proof that she and Casson could survive anything. But part of her was tired, bone deep tired. Can we stay together? She asked suddenly. Asher looked her dead in the eyes. Yes, no, that's non-negotiable. JC folded the brochure and slipped it under her pillow. I'll think about it. Asher nodded as if that was more than he expected. That afternoon, they didn't go brick hunting. Instead, they sat in the shade of a small grove behind the model house, sipping cold lemonade that Asher had brought himself. JC didn't talk much, but Casson laughed once, just once, at something Asher said. It sounded like a bird learning to sing again after winter, and JC, for the first time, didn't stop him. The ride to Everstead was long and quiet. Asher had offered to fly them in a private jet, but JC refused. We don't belong in the sky, she said bluntly. So instead, they drove. 6 hours of open road, dusty hills, and endless fields that flickered like waves beneath the golden sun. Casson had fallen asleep in the back seat after the first hour, curled under a blanket with an empty bag of trail mix clutched in his hands. His soft, even breathing was a kind of music to JC. It was the only proof she had that, at least for now, he felt safe. Asher drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes focused but calm. He didn't talk much, not unless JC asked something. And even then, his answers were gentle and short. She appreciated that. Most adults filled silence with noise because they were uncomfortable. But Asher didn't seem afraid of quiet. In fact, he almost seemed to understand that she needed it. Around hour 4, JC finally spoke. Why'd you call it Everstead? Asher glanced sideways at her, then back to the road. Because ever means always, and stead means a place. I wanted it to be a place that always feels like home, even to kids who never had one. JC looked down at her hands. They were finally healing, no more fresh cuts. The deep red lines from brick edges were now faint pink scars. She still felt the weight of the bricks in her memory, but not in her fingers anymore. I don't trust people who talk like that, she said. I know, he replied. So, why do you? Because I promised myself that if I ever made it out of my own mess, I'd build something better for kids like me, like you. JC didn't respond. Not right away, but she didn't argue either. When they reached the gates of Everstead, the road changed. It curved gently up a hill, lined with tall sycamore trees, their leaves a soft green canopy overhead. The air was cooler here, cleaner. The buildings came into view slowly, charming brick cottages nestled among gardens, walking paths, and open fields. It didn't feel like an institution. It felt like a village, like a dream carefully stitched into reality. A tall woman in her 50s, wearing jeans and a white button-down shirt, stood waiting at the circled driveway. Her hair was in a loose braid and her smile was calm, not forced. Behind her stood a younger man with a camera slung around his neck and a clipboard in his hand. Asher parked, stepped out, and opened the back door. Casson blinked awake, disoriented. Are we there? JC nodded slowly. Yeah, we're here. They stepped out together. The woman came forward, offering her hand. I'm Marin Dorsey, she said warmly. Director here at Everstead. You must be JC and Casson. Casson hesitated before shaking her hand. JC didn't move. Marin didn't mind. You don't have to shake my hand if you don't want to, she said kindly. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. That caught JC's attention. Most adults pretended to give choices. This woman meant it. The tour began slowly. They walked past classrooms filled with sunlight and shelves of books. Through glass windows, they saw children painting, learning guitar, baking bread. Outside, kids their age played basketball or sat under trees reading. No security bars, no locked doors, no shouting staff. Everything here seemed human. This is where we keep the animals, Marin said as they reached the far end of the property. Horses, goats, a few rescued dogs. The kids take turns helping out with feeding and brushing. Kassan's eyes widened. Real horses? JC watched his face, watched the way wonder softened his exhaustion. Marin looked at JC. You'll have your own room, but we keep twins close. There's a shared living area where you can eat together. Cook if you want to, or just be. And if we want to leave? JC asked suddenly. Marin didn't flinch. Then you can. We'll never hold you against your will. We're not a prison. We're a sanctuary. Asher had stayed back during most of the tour. He let them see the place for themselves. He only stepped forward when Marin finished and looked at JC gently. So? He asked. What do you think? JC's throat felt tight. She hated that it felt good. She hated that it felt safe, because safety always vanished. But then, she looked at Casson, who was petting a dog through the fence, smiling in a way she hadn't seen in over a year. And something inside her cracked. I don't know if I can believe in this, she said quietly. Asher didn't push. That's okay. Sometimes belief comes after you start living it. JC nodded. She turned to Marin. Okay, she said. We'll stay. For now. Marin's smile never changed, not even a flicker. Then welcome home. That night, in their small shared suite with 2 beds and a window that looked out over the trees, JC tucked Casson in. There was no sirens, no shouting in the street, no buzz of flies. Just the sound of wind rustling leaves. JC lay on her own bed, eyes wide open. She didn't sleep. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The first week at Everstead felt like a dream JC didn't trust. Each morning began with sunlight filtering through pale curtains and the distant sound of birds, rather than the harsh horns of trucks or the groaning screech of dumpster lids. She still woke before sunrise. Old habits die hard, and sat by the window in silence, watching the wind move through the trees. Casson, on the other hand, adapted faster. Too fast, JC thought. He laughed now. He played soccer with the other kids, fed a goat he named Napkin, and started drawing again. Sketches of horses and brick walls and pancakes with faces. He spoke more during meals, asked questions in class, and once, JC caught him humming a tune while brushing his teeth. That scared her more than anything, because she didn't believe it would last. She kept expecting the staff to yell, to grab, to shove, but they never did. When she forgot to finish a worksheet, her teacher, Mr. Corrin, a soft-spoken man with thick glasses and a voice like radio static, simply asked, "Want more time, JC?" No sarcasm, no punishment, just patience. She waited for the catch. There was always a catch. On the 6th day, she found herself face to face with it, or so she thought. She was returning from the art room with a charcoal-smeared hand and a stiff drawing rolled under her arm when she saw a man in a dark coat standing by the main entrance. He was talking to Marin. His face was sun-worn, with thin lips and a cigarette tucked behind one ear. He glanced at JC briefly before turning away again. Alarm bells exploded in her chest. She backed away quickly, then sprinted back to her room. She slammed the door shut and stood against it, breathing hard. Casson, who was reading on his bed, jumped. "What's wrong?" he asked, eyes wide. "I saw someone," she hissed. "I don't like him. I think he's from the system. Maybe the shelter." Casson's face paled. "Are they taking us back?" "Not if I can help it," she said. She pressed her ear against the door, listening for footsteps, for anything out of the ordinary. But all she heard was silence. Then a soft knock made her flinch. She opened the door a crack. It was Marin. She stood there calmly, holding a folder. "There's someone here who asked about you," she said gently. "I wanted to tell you myself so you don't panic." JC's heart slammed in her chest. "What do you mean?" "His name is Emmerich Lang. He's from the county office. Not here to take you. Just here to update your file. He has paperwork that legally lists you as missing children. We're working on reversing that." "You could have warned us," JC said sharply. Marin didn't flinch. "I could have. And I will next time. But I wanted to make sure he wouldn't speak to you unless you wanted to." JC didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I don't trust people with clipboards." Marin gave a half smile. "Neither do I. That's why I stood next to him the whole time." It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. No one was dragged away. No doors slammed. By the end of the day, Emmerich Lang was gone, and Marin returned with 2 steaming mugs of cocoa and an explanation. "You're not ghosts anymore," she said. "The state now recognizes you as placed under private educational protection. That's a long way of saying, they can't touch you without talking to me. And I'll always talk to you first." JC held the mug in her hands for a long time before taking a sip. It was warm and thick with cinnamon. Do you think people like us ever really get to be safe? She asked. Marin looked at her with eyes that had seen generations of children ask the same thing. Safety isn't a switch, she said. It's a door. You walk through it every day, even if it creaks, even if you want to run back. And eventually, it becomes home. That night, JC sat on her bed, long after Kassan had fallen asleep. She stared at the rolled-up drawing she'd made, a cracked wall with two figures standing on either side, hands reaching across. She thought about that wall, about how many people had built it around her, about how many bricks she had added just to keep others out. Then she got up. She walked to Marin's office and slipped the drawing under the door. No note, no signature, but in the lower left corner she had written two words in black smudged charcoal. Still trying. By the third week at Everstead, JC began to notice something unusual. She was no longer afraid to hope. It crept in quietly like sunlight beneath a door. One morning she woke to birds chirping outside her window and didn't immediately feel the urge to count escape routes. At lunch, she asked for seconds without shame. She even laughed, genuinely laughed, when Casson accidentally sprayed juice all over his drawing in art class and turned a tree into a surreal purple waterfall. But nothing shocked her more than what happened on Thursday afternoon. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, group reading in the library, then electives. JC had chosen woodworking, not because she loved it, but because she liked the silence of tools and the smell of raw pine. Mr. Corin had shown her how to hold a chisel, and something about carving into wood felt honest, real. She was finishing the edge of a birdhouse when Marin entered the room. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held that particular brightness JC had learned to read, a mix of anticipation and something carefully measured. JC, Marin said, you have a visitor. The chisel paused mid-cut. JC's heart skipped. She slowly turned. Who? Marin smiled. Asher Lowell. A few of the other kids gasped. They knew the name, the billionaire, the man who funded Everstead, the one who had once carried bricks with a child down a construction road. JC wiped her hands on her apron and followed Marin outside, every step careful. Asher stood near the stables in a soft gray jacket, leaning against the fence like he had all the time in the world. He looked different, less polished, more relaxed. His sleeves were rolled up, and there was sawdust on his boots. She stopped a few feet away. You're late, she said. Asher raised an eyebrow. Was I supposed to be early? You said you'd come check on us in 2 weeks. It's been 3, he smiled. Fair. You keeping score? Always. He chuckled and nodded toward the paddock, where Casson was brushing a chestnut mare with a young volunteer beside him. He's grown. He eats 4 breakfasts now. Good. Means he feels safe. They stood in silence for a moment. JC didn't know how to say what she wanted to say. She had never been taught how to talk about trust, or gratitude, or beginnings that didn't end in heartbreak. Finally, she asked, why did you really come today? Asher met her eyes. Because I couldn't stop thinking about something. What? You, he said plainly. And that day you told me, people don't do nice things unless they want something. I wanted to prove that's not always true. JC crossed her arms. You already did. He smiled faintly. Maybe. But I also came because I wanted to ask you something. She raised an eyebrow. Okay. I'm building something new, Asher said. A youth center. Downtown Santa Fe. Not a school, more like a safe space. For kids who slip through the cracks, there'll be workshops, food, showers, a recording studio, even job training. But I want it run by people who get it. People who know what it's like. JC narrowed her eyes. I'm 10. You're 11 in 4 weeks. Still a kid. And that's exactly why I want your opinion, he said. On everything. Design, rules, what to allow, what to avoid. The kinds of questions no rich adult ever thinks to ask. She blinked. You want me to help? I want you to lead when you're ready. JC didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, calloused, stained with wood and ink. Once, they had only been good for carrying bricks. Now, someone was asking if they could build something more. She looked back at Asher. Can I bring Casson when we go see it? Of course. And can I say no if it sounds fake? You can say whatever you want. She nodded slowly. Then maybe. But you'll have to ask me again. I will. He stepped away from the fence and offered her something small, a thin silver chain with a pendant shaped like a tiny key. What's this? She asked. And the first thing I ever bought with my own money when I was 16, he said. I kept it as a reminder that I could unlock doors people swore I'd never touch. I want you to have it. Doesn't mean you owe me anything, it just means you're not on the outside anymore. JC held it tightly in her palm. The metal was cool against her skin, heavy with meaning. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. But later, when she was back in her room, she hung it beside her bed. And that night, for the first time since she could remember, she dreamed of a future. Not of escape or running or hunger, but of light pouring through windows she helped build with her own hands. She didn't tell anyone what the dream was about. But when Casson asked the next morning why she was humming, she just said, "It's stuck in my head," and handed him an extra biscuit from the kitchen. Something had shifted. Hope was no longer creeping in. It was walking through the front door. The first real test came 1 month after Asher's visit. It was a Tuesday, bright skies, soft wind, a normal day by Everstead standards. JC had just finished her math module and was heading across the courtyard to meet Casson near the stables when she heard the shouting. It wasn't loud, not at first, but it was the kind of sound that didn't belong in this place. Sharp, rough, unfiltered panic. She dropped her notebook and ran. Casson was on the ground, his small frame trembling violently, his face twisted in pain. His hands clawed at his chest, eyes wide with terror. Beside him, 2 horses whinnied and stomped nervously, sensing the distress. He was having an asthma attack. JC's entire body froze for half a second. Then instinct took over. "Where's his inhaler?" she screamed, turning to the nearby handlers. I don't know," said a panicked volunteer. "He didn't bring it out. I told him to keep it in his pocket." JC dropped to her knees, cradling her brother's head. His breaths were short, desperate gasps that barely pulled any air. His lips were beginning to tint blue. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Casson, look at me," she said urgently. "I'm right here. Don't you dare give up, you hear me?" Staff swarmed around them within seconds. Marin knelt beside JC and gently touched her arm. "We've called the ambulance. It's already on the way. He's going to be okay." "He needs it now," JC cried. "He can't wait 10 minutes." Asher had once told her to never be afraid to ask for more than what people were willing to give. So she didn't wait. She demanded, "Get me albuterol. Someone's got to have it." One of the medical assistants, a former EMT, rushed from the infirmary with a backup inhaler and spacer. Within seconds, Casson had it pressed to his lips, and they waited. JC held him as the medication worked its way into his lungs. His body trembled for a full minute, then 2. Finally, his breathing slowed. The color returned to his cheeks. When the ambulance arrived, he was already sitting up weakly, still dazed, but alive. They took him anyway, just to be safe. JC sat in the back with him, refusing to let go of his hand. At the hospital, doctors confirmed it was a moderate but dangerous episode triggered by dust near the stables. It could have been worse, much worse. And it would have been if no one had reacted as fast as they had. JC didn't leave his side all night, and for the first time since they'd arrived at Everstead, she realized that the scariest thing in the world wasn't suffering. It was the thought of losing the only person who had ever truly belonged to her. The next morning, as golden light poured through the hospital room window, Casson stirred. "You cried," he mumbled. JC looked down at him. "No, I didn't." "You did," he insisted with a weak smile. She smirked, brushing hair from his forehead. "Liar." He blinked slowly. "Are we still safe?" She swallowed. "Yeah, we are." When they returned to Everstead, something shifted. Casson was treated like a hero. The staff reinforced his new medication schedule. Marin arranged for portable air purifiers near his workspace. Everyone checked in without hovering. It wasn't pity, it was care. And JC changed. She attended more group talks. Not just sat through them, but actually spoke. When they discussed fear, she admitted hers. When they talked about family, she talked about her mother. When the subject turned to trust, she fell quiet, but didn't walk away. Later that week, she joined a writing elective. At first, she wrote nothing but jagged sentences and fragments of memories. But over time, the fragments became stories. Raw, sharp-edged tales about alleys, bricks, hunger, and a boy with asthma who once breathed like a dying bird, but now ran beside horses. And then came the assignment. Write about your turning point. JC sat alone at her desk for over an hour, staring at the blank page. Then she began to write. She didn't write about Everstead. She didn't even write about Asher. She wrote about the moment she realized Casson could be taken from her, and she wouldn't survive that kind of silence again. She ended the piece with just 4 words. He lived. I changed. When she read it aloud, no one spoke for a full minute. Even Marin had to wipe her eyes. That evening, Asher called. Not to check on them. He already knew what had happened, but to ask one question. Are you still building walls? He asked gently. JC looked out the window toward the place where Casson had collapsed. She thought about the fear, the fight, the tiny inhaler that had bought her more time. No, she said, not walls anymore. What then? She smiled faintly. Doors. 3 months after that first encounter on the roadside, after the bricks, the biscuits, the battles with fear, JC stood on a small wooden stage inside the newly opened Lowell Center for Youth in Santa Fe. She wasn't alone. Casson sat in the front row, a clean white shirt buttoned crooked at the collar, his sneakers tapping nervously against the floor. Beside him, Marin held a clipboard, though she hadn't looked down at it once. Teachers, counselors, donors, volunteers, and a dozen kids from Everstead had filled the wide room. Camera crews had come too, invited not by Asher, but by word of mouth. This wasn't about fame, but about proof that something real was being born. JC's heart beat in her ears. She had never stood behind a microphone before, never spoken to a crowd, never been asked to share anything more than her labor or silence. Now, people were listening. Asher stood in the corner, hands in his pockets, watching her with a quiet kind of pride. He hadn't pushed her to speak today. He'd simply asked if she wanted to say something. She had said yes. Now it was time. She took a breath and began. And when I was 10, she said, I thought my job was to carry bricks. A pause. The room stilled. Bricks were how we survived. We found them, lifted them, sold them. Me and my brother, we had no one, no home, just bricks and broken pavement and hunger so deep it made your skin feel like paper. And I believed, deep in my bones, that people only helped you if they wanted something in return. She looked at Casson, then back at the audience. I was wrong. She adjusted the microphone with a trembling hand, then continued. One day a man stopped his car. He didn't try to take us away. He didn't ask for anything. He picked up a brick, just one. And for the first time, we weren't alone in the wait. A few people shifted in their chairs, moved. I didn't trust him, not at first. I didn't trust anyone. But he didn't stop showing up, and neither did the people at Everstead. They didn't try to fix me. They didn't say, you'll be fine. They gave me space to be scared, angry, tired, and eventually I got tired of being scared. She smiled slightly. It was small, but real. I thought surviving meant staying invisible. But here I learned that surviving isn't the same as living. And living means being seen. It means asking for help. It means building something, not with bricks you carry on your back, but with hands that are finally free to create. She looked down for a moment, then up again. Today, I'm not just someone who was saved. I'm someone who builds now. I helped design this place. Every rule, every room, every color. We chose it. Me, Kassan, and the other kids. This is our blueprint. And it's not perfect, but it's ours. She cleared her throat and her voice grew steadier. There are thousands of kids out there still carrying bricks. Maybe not literally, but they're hauling weight no child should carry. I used to be one of them. Now I'm here. And I'm saying, loud enough for anyone to hear, there's a better way. She stepped back from the microphone. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the applause started, not polite or soft, but rising, real, raw. It rolled through the room like thunder and broke against the walls. JC stood still, stunned, until Casson ran up and wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her tight. You sounded like a superhero, he whispered. I feel like one, she whispered back. Later that night, after the lights had dimmed and the speeches were over, JC stood in the garden outside the center. The sky stretched endlessly above her, velvet dark and pinpricked with stars. Asher joined her quietly. You're not a brick carrier anymore, he said. No, she replied. I'm a builder. He smiled. You always were. You just needed the space. She turned to him. Why'd you stop for us that day? You didn't have to. He looked at her with that same steady expression. "Because I saw myself in you," he said, "and I knew no one ever stopped for me." They stood in silence, the good kind. "I'm going to do more," JC said, "for other kids. I'm not stopping here." "I know. You'll help? As long as you'll let me." She nodded, then looked up at the stars again. Her hands were still rough, still marked, but now they carried something new. Blueprints, pencils, voices, ideas, not bricks. And in that quiet, beneath that vast sky, J.C. Lowell, the girl who once scavenged for dimes and slept behind dumpsters, became something no one had expected. A voice, a leader, a future. And she would never carry that weight alone again. In my view, the ending of this story is not just hopeful, it's transformative. What began as a tale of survival evolved into something much deeper, a story about reclaiming identity, rewriting destiny, and redefining what it means to be strong. JC didn't need to be rescued, she needed to be recognized. And that distinction matters. This isn't about a billionaire saving poor kids. It's about a girl who, once buried under the weight of survival, rose to become a builder of something new, a force. The true power of the ending lies in its realism. JC isn't suddenly perfect. She still carries scars, memories, caution, but now she chooses to carry purpose instead of pain. And that quiet decision, to become the builder, not the burden, is more powerful than any rescue. It reminds us that sometimes the most heroic thing a person can do is stand up, speak their truth, and create something better, not just for themselves, but for others still lost in the wait. JC's story ends not with closure, but with a door swung wide open. And I think that's the most beautiful kind of ending there is.